Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's exactly 6 o'clock, and we are here with the session. I'm incredibly happy. It's also great to see that we already have a few people in the live room, so that's great to see. And I'm incredibly excited myself, and very happy to invite to have Arindam with us. Before we get into the session, very quick introduction on our end. My name is Piyush Ranjan. I am the founder and chief consultant of Management Masters. We are a boutique admissions consulting firm for the top MBA and MIM programs. And over the last 2 years that we have been operational, we have been able to help our candidates get into some really nice colleges, including some M7 admits at Wharton and Kellogg, and then LBS, HEC Paris, and a few other top schools, right? So that's been very incredible and very fortunate. At the same time, one of the key things that always comes up when candidates reach out to us and they're looking for MBA programs is that they want to get into product management. And then I fortunately found Arindam's profile and some of the excellent work that he's been doing with NextSleep. And he graciously agreed to do a session with us for product management. So this session is basically dedicated to figuring out what product management is about, the basics about it, and how could an MBA actually help candidates get into product management, product managerial roles and degrees, right? So without further ado, let's start with the session very quickly. Let's start with a very quick introduction. Thank you, Arindam, for joining us. It would be great if you could just very shortly introduce yourself to the audience, and then maybe tell us a bit about what you're doing with NextLeap and what exactly is it about?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Piyush, for having me. Excited to be kind of chatting. I think I graduated back in 2007 from IIT Kharagpur, and then started off in a very different world from the world that I am kind of working in today. Was with Procter & Gamble, so manufacturing diapers. So was the operations manager for Pampers. Kind of ran the full circle, like till a few months ago, I was selling diapers on e-commerce platforms. So
I'm the one buying the diapers.
Yeah, so for customers like you. So 1 year with Procter & Gamble, then after that in 2008, when the world was kind of crumbling down with the Lehman fiasco, I decided to start up. And in 2008, I started up in the education space, though EdTech was not quite a term at that point in time as hyped as it is today. Neither was the venture ecosystem as mature as it is today. So, but some excellent learnings at that point in time. And those learnings actually kind of have influenced me to kind of make the journey till today, where I'm running an EdTech startup, NextLeap. In between, like post that, I went to HBS for my MBA. So 2 fantastic years there. I was kind of in the precursor to the 2+2 program. So I got a 2-year deferred admit. I'd applied in the final year of college and then was fortunate enough to get through. 2 fantastic years there, learned quite a bit, and then decided to get back into the corporate world. Started off with Avery Dennison, where is kind of building out a product suite around RFID software. Then kind of moved back into the consumer internet space with TripAdvisor, and Flipkart came knocking back in 2014 at that point in time. So, and then was amazed by the team and decided to kind of relocate back to India in 2014. So from 2014 till end of 2020, I was with Flipkart, primarily leading all of consumer experience and growth, and seeing the organization also grow by leaps and bounds. And post that, decided to kind of start up again. And obviously, once the bug has bitten you, so you want to kind of get back to that. So I'm no different there. So, and based on my learnings and my experiences over the decade-long career in product and in technology overall, I realized that even though like we are always working in the professional world, our learning kind of becomes very unstructured as you enter into the professional world, compared to a very structured way of learning that we have in school and college. So, and I always used to struggle with that. And corporate L&D was pretty much broken, and online courses were very boring. So I thought there has to be a better way. And those were the trigger points which led me to kind of dig deeper. And as I found out was like, yes, a lot of the validations came in from the users that we talked to. And that's what kind of NextSleep is trying to address. And the way we are thinking about it is, what if we can imagine a university-like setup for working professionals, wherein you are learning from industry experts, you are getting guidance from mentors, you are able to network with like-minded peers, right? So just like in college, a lot of the learning happens outside of the classroom, a similar kind of a thing. So it's kind of a learning network of sorts for like early and mid-career professionals in the technology space. We started off with product as the focus area, and we plan to expand it to other functions as well as we scale up.
Okay, that sounds really, really incredible. I think the fact that you talked about how the L&D programs are sort of broken and nobody really likes doing them in companies and online courses, I think that makes so much sense. I have no clue how many times I have sort of skipped out and learning new things because they're just, you're supposed to finish off certain courses to tick off all the marks or to tick off all the check boxes in terms to highlight your learning has been done for the financial year, right? So absolutely makes sense, and I think so. Is this like a very interactive sort of programs that you build at NextLeap?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's heavily influenced by my experience at HBS, where it was a case method of learning, and I found that really different and effective. Because what happens otherwise is like there's a lot of knowledge transfer, but that application of those concepts of that learning is not there. And true learning happens only when you're applying the concepts, right? So our kind of pedagogy that we are kind of going ahead with it at NextLeap is a lot more application driven. We call it the 10-20-70 kind of a rule, where 10% is the knowledge transfer from the industry expert, 20% is the feedback and guidance you receive from the mentors and the instructor, and the 70% is actually the doing. All right, you will be kind of working on problem statements, getting peer feedback, getting feedback from the instructors and mentors, which makes you kind of learn that a lot better, which is very different from online courses which are available, which are more about watching some boring video lectures, and it's kind of a fire and forget, or many a times you're just reading blogs or newsletters, dime a dozen of them exist nowadays, but the true learning never happens unless and until you apply it. So our focus is more on how can we get people to apply these concepts. So that's kind of the way we are operating. Yeah.
All right. And the current programs that you have, they are focused for product management, right?
Yeah, we started off with product primarily because that's a familiar zone for us. And we want to kind of prove out the model with this and then kind of replicate it across other functions like design, user research, digital marketing, analytics, because the problem statements are pretty much the same across all these functions. It's not that there's anything unique for product. But yeah, in technology, especially as the technologies around us are changing so rapidly, right? So upskilling is kind of a continuous need. So our entire model is based on continuous learning and community-led learning, right? So these are the two primary pillars on which NextLeap is kind of building out.
All right, makes so much sense. Let's very quickly do a very quick poll with our audience as well, so it allows us to understand what kind of audience we have. So just a very quick question, guys. Completely going to be anonymous. We wouldn't know who has answered what, but it would be really nice if you could just tell us if you're already working as a product manager, if you're already in such a role, just to understand where our audience is coming from. All right, so that's pretty interesting. We have like 50-50 of sorts at this point of time. It's quite a tussle. So it goes to 60, it comes back to 50. Right now we are at 40-60 of sorts. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So we have almost 40% people who are already working as product managers, and then 60% who are not product managers. But I think this session could help us understand. We'll also talk a lot about how you could move towards product management and how what are the expectations for product management.
Sure.
So this makes a lot of sense. Thank you again for everyone for participating in this. I think the verdict stands at 40-60, so that's pretty interesting. Another question that we have is just to understand how likely are you to take up external upskilling programs in order to be able to get into your desired roles? Is that something that you've actively considered, or is it something that you are not considering at all, had a very bad experience and you don't want to do that again? Or is it something that you are still contemplating and you might go either way? Okay, so that sounds, I think that here we have much more force in the answers. We have almost 75% people.
That's good validation for me as well.
Yeah, that's changing very rapidly though. We have 60%, 30% who are contemplating. So if they find value, they wouldn't be maybe apprehensive of going ahead for it. But then, yeah, 60% of the people, only 8% saying that they're not interested in taking up external programs. But that sounds pretty interesting. Thanks again, guys, for sharing. Let's get back into the meat of the deal, right? So let's get back into the main things that we want to talk about. And before we start talking about product management, right? Arindam, could you just help us understand what exactly is product management, especially for the rest of us who don't come from the industry, who don't have a background in product management? What exactly does it mean when you talk about product management, and what does a typical PM role include?
Yeah, so I think let me kind of give you a bit of a history around how product management came to be as a function itself, right? And it'll help you understand it a bit better. So back in the 70s, maybe, right, where we did not have the internet pieces, etc., all of that, right? So, but we still have had the IBMs of the world. There used to be a role called the technical salesperson, okay? And that person's primary responsibility was to reach out to the clients, right? Reach out to the customers, which were not kind of in millions. Those were kind of in hundreds, basically. And they used to get those requirements, and they would work with their R&D division or their engineering division to make sure those requirements are addressed. All right. And now, as you fast forward to kind of the 90s or kind of the last kind of decades, last couple of decades, with the internet coming in, a lot of things changed because suddenly you saw a lot of consumer internet businesses come in, right? With the Yahoo and the Google of the world coming in. And what was different here was that your number of users were no longer in the hundreds, no longer in the thousands, but in the millions, right? So it was not possible for one person or a set of people to really go out, reach out to so many users to understand what their experience is, what their requirements are, and all of that. So then the thing is, how do you actually go about building your business? How do you go about building your product? Because you need to understand what is going to create value for your consumers, right? And build accordingly so that you can capture that as your business value, right? So and grow your business. That's the intent. And that kind of gave rise to the role of a product manager, where the product manager is now actively working with data, actively working with technology, actively working to understand the consumer's needs, right? And figuring out how to solve the needs of the consumers, right? And if I have to sum it up in one line, it's about really trying to understand what will generate value or add value to the customer's lives, and through that being able to generate business value, right? It's both, right? You need to understand what is going to really add value in the customer's lives and build out a solution which will then drive your business value, right? So that's basically how I look at product. And obviously, as you can understand, like it's kind of pretty much at the center of everything. And which is why the classic Venn diagram, which many people are familiar with consumer and technology and business and being at the center of all of these. I have a slightly different take on that. And my take is it's not enough for a product manager to operate at the center of that. The product manager's key responsibility there is to bring all the stakeholders, be that the designer or the engineer or the business partner, at the center. That's when the true magic actually will happen. Because if the product manager can make the designer understand the technology constraints and the business need, make the business person understand the consumer side of things and the technology constraints, and make the engineer understand the business need and the consumer, that's when the true magic actually happens. And that's one of the fundamental roles of a product manager, to bring everything together. So it's kind of you're kind of the master of the orchestra of sorts, right? So you don't have any authority, but you need to kind of get that job done, right? So I think that's how I look at this particular role.
That's incredible. It's a very interesting sort of explanation, and that makes a lot of sense. But then it does bring me to a question: like, is there any difference in product managerial roles across industries? Because when essentially today anybody talks about product management, the first thing that goes into that comes into the mind is always about going into tech companies, right? So it's always about tech companies and tech product managers, tech companies, tech product managers. But you also come from an FMCG background, right? So would you have product managers in FMCG companies? And if so, how does the role really differ, or what are the similarities, if you could talk about those?
Yeah, absolutely. In a lot of FMCG companies, you would actually see a role as product manager, but largely what you would see is a brand manager role, right? And if you think about in FMCG companies, the way FMCG companies operate is that the brand manager is responsible for growing the brand, right? But that brand manager would work with the salesperson, would work with the operations folks, would work with market research. But the brand manager is a very coveted role in FMCG companies, right? Because that is a person who is that master of the orchestra there, all right? And during my stint at P&G as well, I had that first-hand experience. And there is actually an interesting anecdote there as well. I think the very first definition of a product manager role actually came from the P&G world, where if you look back at some of the advertisements of Camay, all right, which was that soap, if you remember, when they were advertising for the role that they were hiring for, even though they did not call it out as a product manager, the definition pretty much fit what a product manager's role is all about, right? So it's very similar that way. So to the brand manager's role in FMCG companies as we know it.
Okay. And usually, what would you say are the kind of stakeholders that product managers are sort of interacting with on a daily basis, or on a week, or let's say on a regular basis? Would it just be the tech teams and the business teams, or would they also be interacting with senior stakeholders or with the management? Could you just give us the understanding of that?
Yeah. So going back to the definition first, right? You're trying to understand what will create value for your users, right? If you start off with that, you are interacting with, say, user research teams, right, who would help you kind of glean those insights from your consumers. A good practice is obviously talking to consumers yourself, right? So you would be kind of having sessions with the consumers yourself, but from a functional point of view within an organization, you'll be interacting with user research teams. Once you've gleaned those insights, you realize what the problem actually is, right? You're defining that problem really well. And that's when you are kind of working with multiple stakeholders to figure out how to solve that problem with design, with engineering, all right? Once you've figured out the solution and you're preparing to launch, then you need to think about distribution, all right? And when you're thinking about distribution, you're working with marketing, you're working with kind of your legal teams. Many a times you're working with your PR teams, you're working with your business teams, right? And as you're scaling it up going forward, you are actually working with multiple other functions as well. And those will be across different levels, be that the leadership you're pitching, because the product manager's role is a lot more about pitching, right? So it's like the internal salesperson of sorts, wherein you've figured out a problem and you're really trying to rally your leadership that this is the problem that we should go after, and this is how we should actually solve this problem. So I think from that perspective, pretty much you'll be working across the board. How is it different across different industries? The role kind of varies quite a bit from industry to industry. At the same time, varies quite a bit from depending on the stage that the company is in. So if you are a product manager in a very early stage setup, you're trying to go to figure out the product market fit, and you're hustling quite a bit, you're pivoting quite a bit, you're trying out different things, right, to see what is going to stick. Versus if you're working in a growth stage kind of a company, you're running a lot of experiments, trying to move metrics, right, launching new features and all of those elements. Versus if you're working in a very mature setup, like the Microsofts of the world or Googles of the world, then you're working a lot more about scaling up existing systems in structured process environments and all of those elements, right? So the role kind of varies quite a bit there. Similarly, if you look at kind of different industries, right? So the complexity levels of different industries are very, very different. So for example, let's say if you're a product manager on Microsoft Word, you have longer release cycles because Microsoft Word is not kind of releasing every week, right? You're not having a version getting released every week. So, which means your release cycles are long, but in each release cycle is packed with features, right? So that's another thing. And it's a very enterprise software, right? So it's a B2B2C kind of a model many a times, right? So you need to keep those things as well in mind, versus let's say if you're working in say Snapchat, right? Which is a direct-to-consumer model and millions of users, right? And you're seeing a lot of scale come together, and you're releasing pretty much on every fortnightly basis. So it's faster release cycles that way. So that way, kind of it's very, very different, right? So based on whether you're working in an enterprise offering versus consumer offering. Versus and in different industries many a times, like let's say if you're working in e-commerce, which is as complex as you can get it, with supply side, demand side, and so many kind of stakeholders in between. So the complexity levels kind of vary widely, and with complexity, the number of stakeholders that you're interacting with also kind of increase. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And so, what would you say is a typical sort of path or a career path that a product manager might have, or aspirants may have who want to get into product management, product managerial roles?
Yeah. So once you get into product, and not just in product, I think it applies to pretty much every function, as I've seen. The first 3 to 4 years is a lot more about technical skill building, wherein you're just learning how to be an efficient operator, an independent operator, and building credibility for your execution skills, right? So you're learning the ropes basically, and trying to figure out how like you can scale up a product and executing a lot, right? Shipping out a lot. So that's the first phase of the first 4 odd years. The next phase, about the next 4 or 5 years, is a lot more about functional skill building, right? Wherein you are going deeper into a specific area which interests you, and that area can be an industry, can be kind of a particular domain like consumer experience or growth, for example, and you're going deep there, right? And you're trying to kind of build your skill sets there, right? So, and the combination of these two usually helps in building out your personal brand, right? Because if you think of yourself as a brand, like what kind of a product manager are you? What would you want others to say when they describe you, right? Are you a consumer-focused guy? Are you a growth guy? Are you an e-commerce guy? Are you a payments guy? Right? You get tagged like that, right? So product in a lot of ways is a T-shaped function. So you can go broad, but you can also go deep, right? So those are the first kind of 2 phases, which will take you through the first 10 years or like 8 to 10 years of your career. After that, you get into managerial kind of skill building, where you are kind of building teams, right? Leading teams and all of that. And then after that, kind of you go into leadership roles. You get into kind of scaling up organizations, building out the strategy, and all of those elements, right? So that's kind of how your career is going to kind of shape up over say 10, 15 years in product. And I guess it's the same story across a lot of other functions.
Yeah. So basically you try to get the flavor of what are the different sort of streams available even within product management across the board, and then try to figure out what you might want to be really associated with, or if you would want to just be the jack of all trades.
Yeah, I think it's fine to be a jack of all trades, as long as you know, like there has to be some common theme, right? Like someone could have worked across consumer, across the supply side of things, across platforms and data and all of that, but all in e-commerce, right? And then you kind of become a subject matter expert for e-commerce as an industry, right? But let's say if you keep moving from one industry to the other, like it becomes very hard to figure out, like, okay, like, do you have any expertise or are you just all across the board, right? So I think that's one of the things to keep in mind as you kind of build out your career.
Okay, so is there something like a common sort of skills or a knowledge base that aspirants, especially people who are still not into the product managerial roles, that they should really look out to build upon if they are looking to sort of get a foot into the door for a product managerial role post in the future?
Yeah, see, I think when you're trying to kind of get into product, and if you go back to the definition of product management as well, wherein you're trying to figure out the requirements of the consumers, which by that definition itself points to the fact that you need to be curious, right? You need to have that curious mindset, right? Which means when faced with a problem, do you go deep to understand that problem deeply enough, right? So that's kind of the very starting point of it. The second part is, can you actually solve that problem solving ability, right? So that's the second big part of it. And that kind of combines a lot of things wherein you're using data, you're using a lot of other kind of elements like your market trends and things like that, understanding the market landscape, all of those elements. And the third part is kind of having that technology bent of mind wherein you are able to solve problems using technology because that helps you to scale your product, right? So at the core of it, these are the three top ones, right? If you kind of zoom out a bit, right, then what you'll see is that it falls into three different layers. One is your execution skills, right, which is more about a lot of these things that I talked about, and then kind of the analytical skills or your critical thinking skills. And then is what we call as the product sense, right? The product sense is the important one, which is as you scale up, as product managers, you are making decisions day in and day out, right? Should I prioritize this or that? Should I kind of work on this particular problem statement or not? Should I choose this solution or that, right? You're making decisions kind of every day almost in your life. So which means that the ability to make those correct decisions in the presence of ambiguity many a times, because you will not have all the data at all points in time, is very, very important, that skill set. All right. So if you have that curious mindset, if you have a learning mindset, and if you have the right thinking kind of frameworks in place, the right mental models to make those decisions, those decision-making skills, if you have these three, I think those are some of the core skill sets we see for a product manager.
All right. I think I almost know the answer to my next question, but because you mentioned regarding tech skills very specifically, I'm probably going to ask that a bit more. Yeah. Would you say that people who come from a tech background or who have, let's say, a BTech or who have worked in the technological industry, they have sort of an advantage when going for such roles, even after, let's say, after they have done an MBA? And we'll come to the association with product management and MBA a bit later on. But I just wanted to get this off a bit. Sorry.
I personally don't think so. And I'll give you a very good example. My product lead right now at NextLeap, he's a fantastic guy, and he has a law background, right? He studied law, he practiced law, and then he moved into product, right? So yeah, I don't think that's the case. I've seen a lot of folks from the design background also move into product. The reason why this question comes up a lot, especially from the Indian kind of market perspective, is because there are so many engineers around, right? It becomes a default almost. But if you look at it from all the things that we talked about, having a curious mindset, having a learning mindset, being able to hone your decision-making skills, nowhere is the technology element comes in, right? But having that learning mindset is very important, because you may not know all the things, right? Especially if you're working with technology products. But if you have that curiosity, if you have the learning mindset, then you'll go deep, right? And you will learn up, right? As long as you have that, and as long as you're willing to put in that effort, you should be all good.
Absolutely makes sense. Now let's come to sort of the association between MBA and product management, right? Because it's almost ubiquitous. Every single person, if they're not a product manager already, they're trying to do an MBA so that they can become a product manager, right?
Yeah.
And what my question is basically, how does this actually relate, and what does an MBA prepare you for, which allows you to become a product manager? Because as you mentioned, the curiosity aspect or the analytical thinking aspect,
Yeah.
these are things which you can't really be taught as per se. You can obviously hone those skills for sure, but how does an MBA really add value? And if you could share some personal experiences, since you already you
Sure.
also did an MBA and then sort of
Yeah.
got into product so
Sure.
much, so that would be great.
Yeah. I think that an MBA, one of the things to keep in mind is an MBA is not a prerequisite to get into product, right? So I just want to kind of get that out of the way first. I've run the APM program at Flipkart for almost 5-6 years, started it off as well. And we were hiring from the IITs and the BITS campuses, so fresh undergrads, and they've gone on to become some of the best product folks in the country and going abroad as well, right? And working in some of the top companies. So then MBA, I don't think is a prerequisite. So that's one thing which I'll get out of the way. But having said that, yes, what you're saying is true. There is a lot of interest amongst folks especially amongst MBA candidates, to get into product. And we've seen that across multiple schools now. If you look at kind of the MBA curriculum, and largely what you'd see is your first year would cover an understanding of all the different functions that exist within an organization, right? From accounting to sales and to understanding organizational behavior and all of those, right? So it helps you understand how the organization functions. That many a times is something which helps you in your role as a product manager, because you'll be working with multiple stakeholders to understand different people's perspectives. It comes in handy. The second element is, as I talked about, decision making is a core skill of a product manager. And some MBA programs, and I was lucky enough to be a part of that, kind of through the case method, what we did was we were kind of being put into those scenarios and play, like pretty much role play the situation that the protagonist is facing. And when you do it over and over again, you get comfortable with decision making, right? And that's something which has definitely helped me in my role as a product person. So I think those are two important elements which I feel add value if you're really aspiring to get into product management. But largely what I've seen, kind of business school kind of curriculum, it's kind of fallen a bit behind when it comes to what's happening in the technology industry. So, and which is why from a pure value add, if you're trying to get into product, I don't think there are many schools which would have like customized programs for you to kind of upskill on product management, right? Very few schools have that. I've seen some of them starting to add those courses, etc., which is definitely going to give you a very good idea about what this role is about and what to expect and how you can kind of pick up some of those skills while in school. But apart from that, I think it's still kind of quite behind right now.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. So if, let's say, if there's a candidate who wants to get into product management and he is already getting into an MBA for that, what would you suggest such candidates to focus on in order to be able to build up their so that they're ready for a product managerial career?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is like, start playing with a lot of technology products, right? And start asking those questions as to why is this product built this way, right? The moment you start asking these questions and you go deeper to find answers to that, right, you'll unravel quite a few things which go into those decision making, because very simply put, like if you think about like WhatsApp, and we use it on a day-to-day basis, and many a times we use it without thinking, like whoever has designed this beautiful product has thought about it in a particular way to keep it so simple yet so functional and so scalable, right? Is pure genius, right? Like three tabs, so simple, right? But that's the thing that if you start questioning more and more, like, okay, why is this product built the way it is, right? And you go deep, right, to figure it out. And right now, all the content is available on the internet. You get to kind of understand a lot of the elements which go into product building, all right? Because the moment you are asking these questions, right, if you think about the fact, like on WhatsApp, if billions of messages are being exchanged on a daily basis, you cannot help but think about the technology stack which enables that, right, in such a seamless fashion. Now, to build that out, right, what would it have taken? How do you think that could have been built out, right? Otherwise, it might look and sound very simple, that okay, billions of messages, but like if you just step back and think about it for a bit, you can actually almost say like it's kind of the latest wonder to have happened, right? So I think from that aspect, if you can foster that kind of curious mindset and hone that mindset, I think you'll go deeper and to understand how technology products are built, right? And layer it with kind of how it can add value, right? Because when you're building products, while you're generating value, you also need to think about the business value that you can capture because you are improving the lives of consumers. So, and that's where your business education can come in handy, right? Wherein you might have understood or studied about certain frameworks on pricing strategies, this and that, right? How do you layer it on top of that, right? That business mindset kicking in. So I think if you combine those things, I think you can actually derive a lot of value and to kind of get ready for a product role. And the best way is to kind of apply that learning, right? And to build it out yourself, build something out yourself. And nowadays there are so many no-code tools available. Like you don't need to code at all. You just need to kind of figure out how to kind of go about doing these things. So I would strongly suggest kind of if someone's kind of aspiring to get into product, it's always a good idea to build it out yourself and go through the process yourself. Only then you'll be able to kind of understand and acknowledge the challenges and the thrill and kind of excitement of building those products up.
Makes so much sense. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go back to something that you mentioned earlier, right? So that an MBA is not a necessity if you want to become a product manager, right? And I also see a few questions here from the audience as well. So it's absolutely, from what I understand from you, it's absolutely possible to get into a product managerial role without an MBA, right? But then, would it be possible for somebody to advance in their career without the MBA? Let's say if they want to move to, if they aspire to get to senior management positions, maybe chief product officer or VP of product. Is that something which is very likely to happen, or the likelihood of that decreases if you don't have an MBA as such?
Yeah. See, the technology industry is different from other industries primarily because it really focuses on meritocracy, right? Versus kind of your credentials, which are on paper, all right? And that's the best part of it, which is why you will see a lot of people who don't have kind of MBA degrees rising to the top. If you have the right skill sets, right? If you are delivering value to the organization, then you will get rewarded, right? So from that perspective, there is no reason why a degree is going to kind of act as a hindrance. I've never seen that in my decade-long career, wherein the degree is the reason. It all comes down to your skills that are being demonstrated, and whether you are being able to demonstrate the skills which are required to get into a leadership level, right? If that is the case, then I don't think it's going to kind of change it.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. I have a very interesting question here, another question, and I think let's talk about that very quickly before we get back into product management. And I think this is also in line with a lot of posts that you are making on LinkedIn recently. So the question is very simple. Hi Arindam, what qualities do you think differentiate a successful PM from a successful entrepreneur?
Differentiate or
Yeah,
are the same
yeah.
that you're saying?
Differentiate.
Differentiate. Okay.
So a great PM becoming a great entrepreneur. I think you were talking more about the successful PM from a mediocre PM.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So I think for a successful PM, I think one of the key elements there is you need to have that high agency, all right? Which means that you are someone who will stop at nothing till the problem gets solved, all right? And there, I think that's a primary distinguishing factor between fantastic PMs and kind of average PMs, right? There's some people who just will not stop till the problem is solved, right? They're just pretty much obsessed with that problem. And that part is common across kind of entrepreneurs as well, right? You'll see those entrepreneurs really obsess about that problem's case, right? And go deep enough to crack it. Something which kind of differentiates, I would say, I don't know, I'm tempted to say that successful PMs within an organization are able to navigate the organization really, really well. All right. And for successful entrepreneurs, they are more rebellious in nature, I would say. All right. Who would just challenge the status quo and just believe in a future which no one else is seeing and that the entrepreneur is seeing. All right. And they would go after that regardless of hearing so many no's from so many investors or so many friends and stuff like that, and still go for it, right? It's very successful PMs I've seen are like they're able to kind of navigate the organization really well that way, operating with that empathic kind of an attitude to bring everyone together while also kind of pushing the boundaries. Yeah.
All right, makes sense. Thank you so much for that. Let's get back to the PM and MBA sort of discussion. And what would you say if somebody is coming from a non-tech background or no similar functional background with product management, and they go for an MBA degree, how easy or difficult is it for such candidates to transition into a product managerial role? What has your experience been like since you've been in recruiting as well for so many years and you've been
I think when you're going for any higher education degree, right, the degree is primarily acting as a signaling vehicle, all right? It's basically signaling to the market that, yeah, like I'm pretty good and you better look at me, right? And better look at my candidature. So I think that's what it achieves. After that, I think it is primarily down to whether you're able to demonstrate your skill sets. All right. And especially in the technology space, because it's completely skill driven, right? So if you're able to demonstrate your skill sets in an interview, and if you have worked on building out products yourself, right, or as side projects, or kind of really gone deep to understand how products are built and studied those elements, right, it will kind of position you really well, I would say. Right. So for people who are coming with non-tech backgrounds, I would say the first thing to cultivate is that curious mindset about how products are built and what all are the elements that go in, and then layer onto it the kind of business elements to figure out how you can capture that value. If you do that, then kind of you should be fairly well positioned when it comes to interviews, etc.
Makes sense. I think we are coming towards the close of the session as well. So we have 15 minutes. Maybe if you have some questions from the audience, I think we can have those as well post this. But just a very quick question: since you've worked in product roles both in India and outside as well, right? So right after HBS and even while during HBS, you were working with a lot of companies to work on their products. Have you noticed any difference which comes because of by the virtue of them being in a sort of a developed economic state compared to when you're developing products for emerging economics like India? Do you see any key challenges or any changes to the product, the PM methodologies itself in general?
Yeah, absolutely, right. The very starting point is access to resources, right? When you're in a developed market, you've kind of a lot of access to resources across the board. In emerging markets, like for example, when I started off at Flipkart and back in 2014, the ecosystem was not as mature. And when I say resources, it's about the knowledge. It's about the talent pool, right? All of those things matter. So I think that's a very big difference, and which is one of the reasons why we are building NextLeap as well, because we realize that in growing economies like India, like Southeast Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Western and Eastern Europe, right? This is a very pretty big challenge, right? If you go to, for example, if you go to the Valley, right, you would see people are very aware about understanding like what user psychology is all about, and they would bake it into their product design elements and all of that. Here, a lot of people don't even understand user psychology, right? So so to build out products, it becomes harder, all right? So, and it's a lot more of trial and error and copying stuff, right, that you've seen without understanding the actual elements which have gone into it, right? So, and I see that happening a lot because people saw that, okay, Clubhouse had a invite only strategy and it really helped them to skyrocket. And so many of the products that I see right now are invite only. There's nothing wrong in building out an invite only strategy, but you need to understand the factors at play, understand the human psychology elements as well. Without that, you will just build half the thing. You will not understand what is going on in the background. So that's just an example. I talked about the access to the talent pool as well, and which is one of the things which we realized back in the day, and which is why we built out the APM program at Flipkart as well, and which has turned out to be a massive success now. And a lot of other companies have kind of followed in the footsteps and starting off their own APM programs also. The other piece is kind of like in developed markets, if you see, right, there is a lot of focus on the process in building out the product, right? While there is a lot of hustle perhaps, but the process steps don't get missed as much, right? You would validate something, you would talk to your consumers, you would look at the data, you would do a lot of those things. In emerging markets, I see a lot of the decisions being taken out of gut, right? Like, okay, the founder feels this, and the process steps keep getting kind of skipped quite a bit, which then kind of hurts you in the longer term, right? So in the developed markets, I've seen that longer term thought process come out a lot more, versus here it's a lot more short term, and it's kind of also a function of how the ecosystem is operating, because, and as you can see in India right now, there's so many funding rounds happening, and there's like a craze of sorts. So people kind of rally around that, and that's where a lot of clones keep coming up and things like that. Not that it does not happen in the Valley, but you think a lot more on the very basics around how can you differentiate yourself, right? And focus a lot more on the steps in the process to building out the product, right? Because if you get the steps in the process right, and if you do it over and over again, your chances of success increase, right? Versus here, it's slightly different. And I think it's a function of the nascency of each ecosystem. As the ecosystem also evolves, as grows, you see a lot of these things come in, right? And especially with Zomato's IPO now, right? Like it's come of age, as you can see, right? So, and these are very good things to happen in the ecosystem. And the more these things happen, you will see the ecosystem also evolve, and each one has to play a role, and that's kind of the hope.
That makes so much sense. Thank you so much, Arindam. Let's open up for questions maybe from the audience. So if you guys have any questions that you would really want to clarify, please feel free to drop them in the chat box, and we can take those up. Let me very quickly check out if there are any other questions which we might talk about. I think we have mostly taken up. We've sort of addressed most of the questions through the chat that we've had so far. Let's very quickly. I see a question that, because we talked about certain schools having product managerial courses, right? So there is a question regarding that. So which sort of schools have that? So one thing that comes to my mind is, for example, that Carnegie Mellon
CMU,
University.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
CMU has one.
CMU Pepper, and they have very recently sort of started a MS in product management.
That's correct.
It's been around 3-4 years for them, but that's a brilliant program which is taking up, and they have a
Yep.
huge, very sort of competitive pool to get into. Right?
Yep.
So that could be very interesting.
Yeah. CMU has a program specifically for product. I know HBS has a course, PM 101 and PM 102 and all of that, and field studies as well. Melissa Perry is now leading that course, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, I think schools have started to realize, again, I don't have an entire list of schools which are doing it, but I think if you just research on the net, you should be able to figure that out. But it's a good sign, right? I think the more academia kind of also prepares students for it, then they come into the industry a bit more prepared.
Just to answer the question, Palak, there are definitely European schools also getting into the list. LBS, for example, has excellent tech programs which focus on product management, also on the other side of tech as well. But there definitely are like really nice European schools who are also joining the league. And I think one way to look at it probably would be look at the locations where the tech ecosystem exists. For example, London is a huge hub, Amsterdam is a huge hub, and then accordingly try to figure out what kind of schools are there close to those locations, really good ones, and they will definitely help you get certain questions, get such roles as well. We have a question like from young or from engineers in very early in their careers, right? Who are currently working in software roles or analyst roles. How can they make transition into PM roles?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of such folks who are trying to transition into a product role there. My guidance to them is as follows. One is try to figure out a side gig opportunity within your organization first, right? Because you're the closest there, right? So can you actually stretch yourself to kind of go beyond your current analyst role or software engineer role to also start working on a smaller product or a problem space as a product manager would, right? People would be a lot more open to that, right? And start getting that experience first, right? Start building out your basic skill sets first, right? And that also helps you pitch yourself for interviews later on, where you get that understanding a lot better, having gone through the product development process quite a bit. And it's kind of building out your portfolio of sorts. Although in product interviews, you don't have a portfolio around like you have it in design, but it helps you have those talking points a lot more, right? So that's one thing which I would suggest. The second thing is kind of insert yourself into kind of preparing for these interviews a lot more, because product interviews happen in a very different way, like where we are trying to understand your problem solving abilities and your product sense, apart from your business acumen and your tech skills, right? So the more you insert yourself into those kind of situations when you're preparing to answer those kind of questions, the better off you will be in interviews. At the end of the day, you need to crack that interview. And the third is kind of try to build your network with existing product managers so that you are aware of a lot of the product opportunities that come up, right? So that and in product, you'll see like it works a lot better through referrals versus kind of random applications, right? So from that perspective, also, if you can get some referrals from your network, then that will kind of be pretty handy. So these are the top 3 things which I would list out.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I think we'll just have one final question before we close up the session. And that is something that I've been meaning to ask you for a while. Now, since you mentioned it for the first time, and that's, could you help me understand what exactly is product sense?
Yeah, so product sense is a lot more about the ability to take those almost correct decisions for your product in the presence of a lot of ambiguity. Because what happens in a product role is, as much as you would want all the supporting data points and right, you'll never have all of it, right? And or you can have all of it, but you will never have that much time, right, to decide. So product sense is a lot more about that. Now, a lot of elements go into it, right? Which means first figuring out which problem to go after, all right? That itself is one big piece, wherein you need to understand the organization strategy, you need to understand the state of your particular product, you need to understand the feasibility of building out something, right? Or being able to solve that problem, whether that problem is going to add value to the business, right? A lot of those things come in. And then you're trying to understand the problem in a much more deeper sense, wherein you're going deep to understand, like gathering all the evidence that you can, right? And then you are trying to kind of solve that, right? And trying to figure out how you can minimize some of the negative consequences that can happen. So all the different elements in the decision-making process get ticked off there, right? So product sense is a lot more about that, being able to make those decisions in the presence of a lot of ambiguity. Right. So, and the good product managers I've seen are like the ones who take that initiative to tell the organization that this is the problem that we should be going after, versus being told that this is a problem, now go ahead and solve it. Because if it's the latter, then what you're doing is primarily executing, and you're turning yourself into an execution machine, right? And you might be very good at your execution skill sets, right? So which is why it's kind of a pyramid of sorts, right? At the very bottom are your execution skill sets. The mid-level is your analytical skill sets or your critical thinking skill sets. And at the top is your product sense, right? Which is more about being able to make the correct decisions in the presence of ambiguity.
Thank you so much for this, Arindam. This has been absolutely wonderful. Sure. What we'll do is we'll put this session on YouTube as well. So there'll be a replay available, but we'll also put this session on YouTube. So if you guys would like to see this again, or sort of go back to this conversation, which has been absolutely enjoyable, you can always do that. Thank you again, Arindam.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
And have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you.